She signed the divorce papers in tears, while her husband fixed his cufflinks for another woman's wedding. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't care. 10 years of marriage, erased like a typo in his perfect life. Her fingers shook as the pen scraped the paper, each stroke a burial for the woman she used to be. Across the table, Dylan Cross, billionaire, polished, untouchable, scrolled through his phone, already halfway into his next chapter. The air smelled of ink, rain, and betrayal. Maren Cole sat there, 6 months pregnant, trying to breathe through the ache of being discarded. The man who once kissed her belly before meetings now couldn't even meet her eyes. His voice, calm and cruel. "Let's keep this clean. I have a flight to catch." Outside, Manhattan blurred behind the glass, a city full of lights, none of them left for her. A single tear hit the page, smudging her name, the only trace that she had ever been here. He walked out untouched. She sat there, shattered, and in that silence, pain became her promise. If you believe every woman deserves her second chance, hit subscribe and stay with her story. Dylan adjusted his Rolex, the same one she had given him on their 5th anniversary. The metal glinted under the ceiling light, cruel and precise. He slid the signed papers toward her without looking up. "All you need is your signature," his lawyer said, voice clipped and tired. Maren nodded, though her hands trembled. The pen felt heavier than it should have. When her name hit the page, something inside her went quiet. No scream, no plea, just the dull ache of finality. Dylan rose, checking his reflection in the glass door like nothing sacred had ended. He buttoned his jacket, smoothed his tie, and walked out. No glance back, no goodbye. Only the faint scent of his cologne lingered, familiar and foreign all at once. Maren sat still long after the door closed, her eyes on the chair he'd left empty. 10 years of laughter, plans, and promises, all folded neatly into a file marked irretrievable differences. She whispered to the echo, 10 years, gone in a line of ink. The lawyer gathered his briefcase, hesitated, then left her alone with a silence thick enough to drown in. Outside, the rain kept falling, as if the sky understood what he never could. By the time Maren stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. 5th Avenue shimmered under silver puddles and neon light. She clutched her coat around her belly, trying to disappear into the blur of umbrellas. Then came the flash. One, then another. "Mrs. Cross!" a voice shouted. "Is it true he's marrying Jade Monroe next month?" The name hit her like a slap. Cameras clicked, reporters leaned forward, smelling fresh blood. Maren froze. Her breath caught. A microphone pushed toward her. "Any comment, ma'am?" She managed a small shake of her head. "No," she whispered, but the word was lost in the chaos. Someone laughed behind the lens. "Guess she didn't see that coming." The sound cut deeper than the rain. She turned away, shielding her stomach as if protecting the only part of her life still untouched. Each step through the crowd felt heavier, slower. Inside the taxi, her reflection stared back from the fogged window, eyes swollen, lips pale, strength barely holding. Outside, another billboard lit up, Dylan Cross and Jade Monroe. The Power Couple of the Year. The city cheered for their love story, while hers ended in silence and rain. The apartment in Brooklyn was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of dust and rain. Maren dropped her bag on the floor and stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by boxes she never finished unpacking. On the wall, their wedding photo hung crooked. Dylan's smile looked rehearsed now, almost artificial. She stared at it for a long moment, then pulled it down. The glass cracked when it hit the trash bin. Her old iPhone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number appeared. "He looks happy. You should move on." She didn't reply. She didn't need to guess who sent it. In the dim light, she opened her laptop. Every headline was the same, his company booming, his new romance glowing. The world had already chosen its side. She closed the screen and whispered into the quiet, "He moved on before I even finished packing." The words felt strange in her mouth, too honest, too final. The rain outside kept tapping on the window like a question she couldn't answer. She lay down, one hand on her belly, and listened to the steady heartbeat beneath her palm, the only sound reminding her she wasn't completely alone. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a notification she didn't want to see. Breaking news: Dylan Cross marries supermodel Jade Monroe at the Plaza Hotel. She clicked before she could stop herself. The live stream filled her cracked screen. Chandeliers, champagne, silk gowns. Jade glowed in white, flawless, adored. Dylan stood beside her, smiling like a man who'd never known regret. Marin sat at her small kitchen table, the cheap bulb flickering overhead. A bowl of instant noodles steamed beside her, untouched. The laughter from the screen felt louder than her own breath. Comment sections scrolled endlessly. Upgrade achieved. He traded a wife for a trophy. Each line another bruise she couldn't hide. She closed the laptop, but the sound lingered, the music, the applause, his voice saying, "I do." For a moment she thought she might break completely. Then her phone buzzed again. Renee's name appeared. "Don't watch it, Mare. You're worth more than the show." She exhaled slowly, tears slipping down her face. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far away. The city kept moving, and so, she decided, somehow, so would she. The knock on the door came just after noon. Renee Carter stood there with 2 coffees and a look that said she'd read every headline. She didn't ask, didn't pity. She just placed the cup in Marin's hand and sat across from her. "You gave him everything," Renee said softly. "Now it's time to give yourself a chance." Marin tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. "A chance at what? Starting over at 38 with 3 months left before I become a mother?" Renee reached over, covering her hand. "A chance at peace, Mare, the kind he'll never find." The warmth of the coffee seeped through Marin's cold fingers. For a moment, the world felt still, almost kind. Outside, sirens faded into the distance, and the city's hum softened. Renee leaned back, studying her. "You've survived worse. You just forgot how strong you are." Marin looked toward the window, the light dull against the rain-streaked glass. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe surviving is all I've got left." Renee smiled faintly. "Then start there." When she left, the apartment was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. For the first time in weeks, Marin didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Marin's phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was short, cruel, and sharp. "Stop embarrassing him. He's happy now." Her breath caught, not from shock, but recognition. Jade Monroe. The handwriting of arrogance dressed as pity. For a moment, Marin felt the old ache rise again, the one that made her small. But then, something shifted. She reread the message, this time without flinching. Her reflection in the dark phone screen looked back at her. Tired eyes, but no tears left. Only resolve. She typed a reply, then deleted it. Jade wasn't worth a word. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote, "If surviving is the only revenge, then I'll survive beautifully." The words felt like armor. Each letter, a small reclaiming of herself. She stood, straightened her sweater, and tied her hair back. The world outside still didn't care who she was, but maybe that was her freedom. Marin glanced at the crib she'd built herself, empty but waiting. "We'll be fine," she whispered. And for the first time since Dylan's goodbye, she almost believed it. That night, the rain returned, harder this time. Marin left the diner after her shift, coat clutched tight, exhaustion heavy on her back. The bus stop was nearly empty. A streetlight flickered overhead. As the bus rattled through Brooklyn, a dull pain twisted low in her stomach. She pressed her hand against her belly, panic rising. The world blurred. The driver's voice sounded distant. Someone stood up from 2 seats back. "Hey, are you okay?" a calm voice asked. She tried to answer, but the pain stole her breath. The man knelt beside her as the bus lurched to a stop. "It's all right. Breathe," he said quietly. His hand steady, voice deep but gentle. He guided her down the steps into the rain, shielding her from the wind with his coat. Outside, the storm soaked them both, but he didn't seem to notice. He flagged a cab, gave quick instructions, and slipped a card into her hand. "Marin," she managed to whisper, clutching it. He nodded. "Elias Vaughn. Call Dr. Harris if they don't admit you." Before she could reply, the cab door closed, and he was gone. Just a stranger in the storm who felt oddly like safety. The hospital lights were too bright, the smell of antiseptic too sharp. Marin sat on the narrow bed, damp hair sticking to her cheeks. The nurse said she'd be fine, but her hands still shook. She looked at the card in her hand. Elias Vaughn, founder, Vaughn Holdings. A billionaire, she realized. And yet, he'd stopped for her when no one else had. The nurse returned with water and a note. "From the man who brought you in," she said. In careful handwriting, it read, "No one should fight alone at midnight." The words hit deeper than the pain. She folded the note, pressing it to her chest. The line felt less like sympathy and more like a promise. Outside the window, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. The city looked smaller from here, almost gentle. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Not as Dylan's ex-wife, not as a scandal, but as someone who mattered. She whispered to herself, "No one should fight alone." It wasn't just a quote. It was something she needed to believe. The next day, a nurse mentioned his name again. That man, Elias Vaughn. His wife passed away last year, cancer. He doesn't talk about it, but everyone knows. Marin nodded quietly, turning the card over in her hand. Loss. It had a way of finding kindred souls. Later that afternoon, as she was discharged, she saw him standing near the exit. Same calm presence, same tired kindness. "You're all right?" he asked. "I will be," she said. He smiled faintly. "Good. Just remember what I said. No one should fight alone." Their eyes met, hers filled with uncertainty, his with a sadness she recognized. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. Two broken people standing in the same storm, pretending they weren't cold. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once and stepped into the rain, disappearing into the gray. Marin watched him go, her hand resting on her belly. The babies kicked softly, like a reminder that life still moved forward, even after everything stopped. For the first time since Dylan left, she didn't feel abandoned. Maybe pain wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just the beginning of someone else finding her there. A week later, she returned for her follow-up check. The nurse smiled when she saw her face, less pale, more alive. But what the doctor found next changed everything. The ultrasound room was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the machine. Marin lay still, watching the doctor's brows lift in surprise. "Wait," he murmured, adjusting the monitor. "Miss Cole, did anyone tell you?" Her heart stumbled. "Tell me what?" He smiled softly, turning the screen toward her. "Triplets. You're carrying 3. The word hit her like thunder. "Triplets? Are you sure?" Her voice broke somewhere between fear and disbelief. The doctor nodded, his tone gentle. 3 strong heartbeats. You're going to need rest. And help. Marin's hand covered her mouth. She wanted to cry, to laugh, to breathe. 3 lives. 3 tiny chances at redemption. But beneath the wonder came the weight. Rent overdue, bills piling, a body too tired to fight alone. When the doctor handed her the scan, her fingers shook. 3 small silhouettes glowed on the paper like constellations. For the first time in months, she felt hope. Wild, impossible, terrifying hope. "Take care of yourself, Marin," the doctor said. She nodded weakly. "I'll try." Outside, the city kept rushing, unaware that inside her, 3 little miracles had just rewritten her fate. That night, the hospital's fluorescent lights still haunted her eyes. Marin sat at her kitchen table, medical papers spread out like unpaid sins. The estimated cost for delivery, neonatal care, and postnatal monitoring, more than she'd ever earned in a year. Her stomach twisted. "Some miracles cost too much," she whispered. Renee arrived minutes later, holding a grocery bag and that same stubborn light in her eyes. When she saw the papers, she didn't speak. She just pulled out 2 cups and poured cheap coffee into chipped mugs. "We'll figure it out," Renee said. "We always do." Marin shook her head. "This isn't a bill, it's a sentence. I can't even afford vitamins, Renee." Her friend sighed. "You gave him everything. He owes you this much." Marin looked down. "He won't pay. He's too busy pretending I never existed." They sat in silence, the city's hum seeping through the cracked window. Finally, Renee said, "Then don't let him erase you. You have 3 reasons not to give up." Marin looked at the ultrasound photo, her tears falling onto the glossy paper. 3 small reasons. And 1 exhausted heart learning how to keep beating. 2 days later, a white envelope slid under her door. The letterhead read, "Cross and Latham, Attorneys at Law." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The words blurred together. Settlement agreement. Confidentiality clause. Non-disclosure. The offer was clear. A one-time payment for her silence. No interviews, no claims, no mention of the pregnancy. Renee read over her shoulder. "He's buying your silence again." Marin's lips tightened. He always did, first with promises, now with money. The numbers looked tempting. Enough to cover the birth, maybe a few months of rent. But every dollar felt like a chain. She imagined Dylan's smug face, Jade's diamond smile, their perfect life paid for by her compliance. The thought made her stomach turn. Renee touched her arm gently. "You don't have to decide tonight." Marin nodded, but her eyes hardened. "I already have." She folded the papers carefully, placed them on the counter, and stared at them until the clock struck midnight. Silence had cost her too much already. This time, she was done being quiet. The next morning, sunlight spilled across her table. The settlement papers lay there, pristine and poisonous. Marin picked up the pen Dylan had given her years ago, a gift engraved with his initials. She stared at it for a long time, then snapped it in half. The ink bled across her palm. "He doesn't get to rewrite my story," she whispered. She tore the agreement, page by page, until the sound filled the room like applause. Each rip was a pulse of freedom, raw and fragile. When she was done, the table was covered in white confetti, shards of control finally broken. Renee called as Marin brushed the scraps into a trash bag. "Tell me you didn't sign it." "I didn't," Marin said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "Then he just lost his favorite weapon," Renee replied. Marin smiled faintly, pressing a hand to her belly. "He'll try again," she said. "Then let him," Renee answered. "You're not the same woman he left." Outside, the morning air felt new. She opened the window and let it in, breathing freedom that tasted like defiance. A week later, she saw him again. Elias Vaughn stood in the hospital corridor holding a small bouquet of white lilies. Simple, unpretentious. Marin blinked, surprised. "You came?" He smiled slightly. "You said you might need that doctor's number. I figured I'd check if you called." His voice was steady, kind, in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. She nodded. "I did. False alarm. Just stress." He looked at her for a moment. Stress can be deadly if you carry it alone. They walked slowly toward the exit. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and rain. At the door, Elias turned to her. "Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it." The words lingered between them, heavy and gentle. Marin didn't answer. She didn't know how, but as he walked away, she felt something unfamiliar stir inside her. Not love, not yet, but hope. When she returned to her apartment, the lilies still sat in her hand. She placed them in a glass jar on the windowsill. They looked fragile against the gray sky, but somehow they stayed upright, just like her. Weeks passed in fragile calm. Her belly grew heavier, her nights longer. She told herself the pain was just fatigue, until the storm came. The contractions came like thunder, sudden, sharp, relentless. Marin gasped, clutching the counter, her knees buckling. Rain hammered the window, a storm echoing her panic. When she opened the door, Elias was already there, soaked, breathless, eyes wide with worry. "The nurse called me," he said quickly. "You weren't answering your phone." Before she could speak, another wave of pain hit. He caught her just before she fell, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Stay with me, Marin," he whispered. "I've got you." They raced through the rain, headlights cutting through the blur of the city. Inside the car, his hand stayed over hers, steady, grounding. At the hospital, the world became lights, voices, chaos. Her body trembled, the pain consuming everything, until suddenly, silence broke. Then came the sound. One cry, then another, and another. 3 tiny voices filled the room. 3 lives fighting to exist. Tears streamed down her face. Elias's voice cracked softly beside her. "They're here." And in that moment, Marin realized she hadn't just survived. She'd begun again. The world was quieter now. Soft monitors beeped in rhythm with 3 small heartbeats. Elias stood beside Marin's hospital bed, holding 3 knit caps, pink, blue, and yellow. "They're small," he said gently, "but they're strong." Marin smiled weakly, exhaustion softening her face. She looked through the glass, where 3 incubators glowed under sterile light. "They have names," she whispered. "Noah? Grace? Eli?" Elias nodded. "Beautiful. Strong names." The nurse adjusted the blankets, smiling. "You did beautifully, Miss Cole. They're fighters, just like their mother." Marin's eyes welled again, not from pain, but gratitude. Elias handed her a cup of water. "You should rest." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" He hesitated. "Because sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it." Their hands brushed, a fleeting, unspoken warmth. Outside, dawn crept across the Manhattan skyline. 3 cries had changed everything, and Marin, for the first time, didn't feel alone. When the twins were stable enough to leave the NICU, Elias made a suggestion that would change everything again. Days blurred into sleepless nights. The babies grew stronger and Marin weaker, torn between healing and surviving. When the doctor insisted she needed supervision, Elias offered the guest house at Vaughn Manor. "It's quiet, safe, fully staffed," he said. She hesitated. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he replied. "It's logistics." They made a deal. Simple, clear. She would pay what she could, remain independent, and keep her work. No blurred lines, no emotional debts. Marin agreed, her pride trembling against gratitude. By evening, she was settled in a warm room overlooking the city. 3 cribs stood side by side. The babies slept, their tiny breaths sinking like music. Marin exhaled for the first time in months. When she looked out the window, snow had begun to fall. For once, life didn't feel cruel. It just paused. Elias passed quietly in the hall, leaving her to rest. She didn't see his smile as he whispered to himself, "Welcome home." The peace didn't last. By morning, the world had her name again. Marin Cole seen leaving hospital with billionaire Elias Vaughn. The photos were everywhere, her face half hidden under a scarf, his hand steady on the stroller. Social media exploded. From heartbreak to high society. One headline mocked. Another sneered. She traded tears for a trust fund. Marin's phone lit up with messages she didn't dare open. Renee called first. "Don't look online. They're tearing you apart again." Marin sat in silence, holding Eli close. Her reflection in the nursery window looked calm, but her chest ached. Elias arrived an hour later, his jaw tense. "I saw it," he said quietly. "The press never learns." "I don't want pity," Marin replied. "I just want them to stop." He met her eyes. "They won't. Not yet." Outside, reporters gathered beyond the gates, flashbulbs slicing through the snow. The world was hungry for another scandal, but Marin was no longer the woman it could devour. By evening, Elias had a plan. "We'll turn your story into a cause, not a scandal," he said. He spoke calmly, the way only a man used to storms could. Through his foundation, he announced a new maternal health program, funding neonatal care for single mothers. Marin's name appeared in the statement, not as gossip, but as grace. The press changed its tone overnight. Elias Vaughn expands charity for struggling mothers. Heartbreak survivor becomes inspiration. Marin read the headlines in disbelief. "You turned me into a cause?" "I turned the truth into armor," Elias replied. "No one gets to weaponize your pain again." For a long moment, she said nothing, then softly, "Thank you." He smiled. "Don't thank me. You built this strength yourself. I just made sure the world saw it." Outside, the city lights flickered like forgiveness. Marin looked down at her sleeping children and whispered, "Let them talk. I'm finally being heard." The headlines spread like wildfire, and somewhere in a glass tower uptown, the man who once owned her story was watching every word burn him alive. Dylan Cross slammed his phone onto the desk. Headlines about Marin flooded every screen. "Single mother turned symbol of resilience." His jaw tightened. He'd spent years controlling the narrative. Now, she was winning it. He called her. No greeting, no hesitation. "You think you can outshine me?" His voice was sharp, metallic. Marin's tone stayed calm. "No, Dylan. I just stopped dimming myself for you." The silence that followed burned hotter than his anger. "You're nothing without me," he hissed. "You're a charity project." She exhaled slowly. "Then you made a mistake leaving me, because I learned to build without you." He laughed bitterly. "Enjoy your 15 minutes." "I don't need fame," she said. "I've got freedom." He ended the call first. But when he looked out over the city, her name was everywhere, attached not to scandal, but strength. And for the first time, Dylan realized he hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost his legacy. Weeks passed, soft and steady. Marin's laughter began to sound less like survival and more like living. Elias noticed the change before she did, the way she hummed while feeding the babies, the light returning to her face. One evening, he appeared in the garden holding a small velvet box. "What's this?" she asked, half smiling. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring, engraved with 3 letters, N-G-E. "For them," he said softly. "Noah, Grace, Eli, and for you, if you'll let me." She blinked back tears. "Elias, He shook his head. "No pressure. Just something to remind you. You're not alone anymore." Her hands trembled as she slid the ring on. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you," he replied. The sun dipped low, painting gold over the ivy walls. For once, love didn't feel like rescue. It felt like peace. The wedding was quiet, almost secret. No photographers, no press, just a garden, soft light, and the sound of 3 babies cooing nearby. Marin wore a simple ivory dress. Elias looked at her like she was something sacred, not saved. Charlotte read a short blessing. Renee cried through the vows. When Elias slipped the ring on her finger, Marin whispered, "To love that doesn't need an audience." He smiled. "To love that lasts even when no one's watching." They toasted with ginger ale and champagne under the vines. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. Later, as the guests left, Marin stood barefoot in the grass, watching the sky darken. She whispered, "We did it," and felt the world exhale with her. Inside, the babies slept peacefully. Outside, the city that once destroyed her finally felt far enough away. Marin Cole was gone. Marin Vaughn had arrived. Months later, after settling into the quiet rhythm of motherhood and work, Marin agreed to attend her first public event beside Elias. The gala at the plaza glimmered under chandeliers, the same ballroom where Dylan had once married Jade Monroe. Now, Marin walked in beside Elias, her head high, her past no longer her shame. Whispers followed her like perfume, admiration mixed with envy. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Vaughn," Jade said sweetly, silver gown, shining. "Quite the comeback. Elias has a type, I see. Broken women with strong PR." Marin turned slowly, her smile soft but sharp. "It takes bravery to start over, Jade," she said. "You should try it sometime." The crowd went silent, then burst into quiet applause. Jade's face stiffened, the perfect mask cracking. Elias reached for Marin's hand. "You didn't need to say that," he murmured. "I did," she replied, "but I said it kindly." The night continued, but the balance had shifted. Marin wasn't the scandal anymore. She was the story everyone wished they had lived. Peace never lasted long when Dylan was losing. A month after the gala, a courier delivered papers to the Vaughn manor. Petition for partial custody. He wanted the triplets. Marin's hands trembled as she read. "He's doing this to hurt me." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight back." Renee came over that afternoon, legal pads in hand. "He's trying to clean his image before the IPO," she said, playing the devoted father card. Marin paced the room. "He didn't even come to the hospital. He never met them." Renee nodded. "Then we'll remind the court of that." Outside, reporters were already gathering, headlines multiplying like vultures. Elias touched her shoulder. "He can use his power. We'll use the truth." Marin met his eyes, steady now. "He thinks I'm still afraid of him." "Are you?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." The storm was coming again, but this time she wasn't facing it alone. Weeks of legal battles followed. Meetings, affidavits, strategy sessions. But when the court date arrived, she was ready. The courtroom was cold, marble floors echoing each step like judgment. Dylan sat across from her, flanked by lawyers in dark suits. Marin held her ground, calm but fierce, the quiet kind of strength that no cross-examination could shake. Renee played the recordings, voicemails of Dylan's assistant confirming he hadn't visited, emails ignoring medical updates. Each word was another nail in the case he thought he'd already won. When it was her turn to speak, Marin rose slowly. Her voice didn't tremble. "He remembers his image," she said, eyes locked on Dylan. "Not his children." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Dylan shifted, jaw tight, mask cracking. Marin continued, steady, resolute. "I don't want his money. I don't want his apology. I just want my children to grow up knowing love doesn't abandon them when things get inconvenient." When she sat down, Elias reached for her hand under the table. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. In that sound, she knew she'd already won. The verdict came 2 days later. Full custody granted to Marin Cole Vaughn. The courtroom erupted with murmurs, cameras flashing as Dylan stormed out, his face carved in disbelief. Outside, reporters crowded the steps, microphones chasing her every breath. Someone shouted, "How does it feel to win?" She paused, smiling faintly. "It's not about winning. It's about protecting what matters." By morning, the headlines read, "Marin Vaughn, the Heart of Manhattan." Every photo showed her walking out of court, chin lifted, 3 children waiting at home. For once, the world saw her not as tragedy, but triumph. Not as scandal, but strength. Elias watched her on the news that night, pride flickering in his eyes. When she turned to him and whispered, "It's over," he shook his head. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning." The past had finally released her, and for the first time, she didn't feel like running anymore. Months later, her story found a new home, on screen. Marin stood behind the camera, directing her first documentary, The Mothers Who Stayed. The film followed women like her, those who were left yet refused to disappear. Each interview carried echoes of her own pain, but also her strength. During the premiere, she stood on stage, voice steady but full of feeling. "They told us we were broken," she said. "We rebuilt stronger." The audience rose in quiet applause. Elias held her hand, eyes glassy, proud beyond words. Later that night, she walked alone through the city. Billboards glowed, lights shimmered across the Hudson, but what she felt was peace. Her story was no longer about what she lost, but what she built. And somewhere in the background, she heard 3 small voices calling, "Mama." That was her real success. The news broke quietly. Dylan Cross declares bankruptcy. Fraud, mismanagement, debts buried in luxury. The empire he built on ego had finally caved in. Renee called, expecting glee, but Marin only smiled faintly. "He ended himself," she said. "I didn't have to." On TV, Dylan appeared hollow, older, stripped of charm. Behind him, Jade Monroe walked away without a word. Marin turned off the screen. In the next room, laughter filled the air, Noah chasing Grace, Elias holding Eli. She leaned on the doorway, watching the life she'd built. The warmth, the chaos, the love, everything money could never buy. Outside, snow began to fall again. The city that once broke her now glowed softly, forgiving. For the first time, she didn't look back. Some stories end in revenge. Hers ended in peace. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the garden at Vaughan Manor. Marin sat on the grass, her children playing beside her, Elias watching from the porch with a quiet smile. Her laughter was lighter now, almost childlike. The pain had faded into something gentler, memory, not weight. A soft voice, the narrator of her own heart. Peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes when you stop needing to prove your worth to anyone but yourself. She looked toward the horizon, where the city skyline shimmered like forgiveness. No bitterness, no grief, just calm. Grace tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, are you happy?" Marin smiled. "More than I ever thought I'd be." As the sun dipped low, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, for pain, for love, for the second chance she never expected. Because some stories aren't about starting over. They're about becoming who you were always meant to be. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after losing everything, this story is for you. Share it. Someone needs hope tonight.